I'm sure Phillies fans would much rather see a guy like Zach Eflin trot out there every fifth day than a guy like Clay Buchholz, Ryan. And, that's typically the mindset of fans in 2017. Give me the young guy. But is it maybe a blessing in disguise for the Phillies that they get a chance to evaluate one of these guys rather than Buchholz, who may or may not have landed them another prospect? It doesn't seem that way of thinking has really worked out for them the last couple of years.
Yes and no. I mean, you go back to Roberto Hernandez, who was kind of a fifth starter, if there ever was a fifth starter, and they got two pretty good prospects for him in Jesmuel Valentin, who was basically the last man cut in camp, and Victor Arano, a hard-throwing prospect. So, I mean, they have been able to move these guys at some point. I know the Hellickson thing didn't work out very well last year, but yeah, I mean, as I kind of wrote, when you're rebuilding team, you add veteran pieces to kind of supplement the rest of your roster, and just so you don't have to rush certain guys. So did they want to force Zach Eflin into the rotation second week of the season? Probably not. He's coming off 2 knee surgeries. They probably wanted him to pitch down there for at least a month and a half. But, things happen. Injuries happen. So, you look at any major league team, rarely do they go 2 or 3 months without a pitcher getting hurt. It's kind of the nature of pitching. So yeah, I mean, you add veterans to kind of supplement the young core and to give yourself a little insurance. And it didn't really work out in the case of Clay Buchholz since he only lasted 2 starts, similar to Charlie Morton last year. But yes, this is where they're at, and it is good to see Eflin. And yeah, they need to see what these young kids can do, the pitchers, the hitters, on through the major league roster to AAA.
Hey, why Eflin? Why not maybe Jake Thompson or somebody else who, as you mentioned, Eflin had been hurt? Why not one of the other guys? How come Eflin was the guy they chose? Which it just happened to be that he was lucky that his day fell in line with Buchholz?
Well, Thompson hasn't pitched particularly well, and I know it's only been a couple starts down there at AAA, but you rarely do call up the guy that's not pitching well. Usually you go with the guy that's pitching well. And probably the only other candidate was Nick Pivetta, who has pitched really well and also impressed in spring training. He's the guy they got from Papelbon, another veteran they were able to move. It's amazing they got anything for Papelbon. It's crazy, but they got a pretty good pitching prospect and a guy that probably will be the next guy up if another pitching vacancy arrives on the major league roster. In the rotation, I should say. But yeah, I mean, Eflin, why they went with Eflin is he's been here before. He showed some flashes of looking really good last year through 2 complete games. That one everybody remembers in Pittsburgh. But he's a young pitcher. He had some bad starts too. But yeah, he had been there, done that. He was a known commodity, and that was kind of the reasoning behind bringing him up now.
I'm talking with Ryan Lawrence. PhillyVoice.com covers the Phillies in New York with the Phils as they get ready to take on the Mets. And, of course, the Mets have kind of owned them. I want to assume there was such a sense of relief that they finally were able to get a win against the Mets team. I know a 1 win in a long season a lot of times doesn't really say a whole heck of a lot. But one thing that I really took from the game last night is you're trying to find out about what this season kind of means. And it shows that this team – certainly looks at themselves as a team that could be maybe an agitator or a team that says, hey, look, just because our expectations aren't where you are, we're not just going to let you push us around all the time. They showed a lot of fight, I thought, in the series against the Nationals, and then last night winning that game when Freddie Galvis really, his decision to not run that out really could have brought the team down. But it shows that this team really has some guts and fought, and I think we're trying to find out what the identity of this team is, and it shows that they're not a pushover.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's kind of the nature of, a roster that they have right now, which is young guys that are trying to prove themselves that want to be here for the long term. A lot of fans will look at it as a roster mostly of stopgap guys and holdover guys, waiting for the guys at AAA to take their jobs. Well, none of those guys in this clubhouse look at themselves that way. They look at themselves as, no, I'm here now, and I don't want someone to take my job. I want to be here for the long term. So, yeah, you're going to have guys that play hard. And, the Galvis thing was just an anomaly. That's not how he plays. That was, it was bizarre, but, he admitted the blame afterward. But, yeah, for the most part, this team plays with that kind of energy that you want to see from a young team, and they don't ever say die without throwing a cliche out there, even though I just did. Yeah, and in the D.C. series, they probably could have won all 3 of those games, but the bullpen kind of collapsed, and they had other things. But yeah, the lineup, and even the young guys at the back of the bullpen are giving this team a chance. They're not scoring 5 and 6 runs a night, but they're doing it when it matters late in games to give themselves a chance to win games. And the blowouts have been few and far between. There was that one last week against the Mets when I think everybody in the lineup hit a home run, but beyond that, that's kind of the exception, not the rule.
Yeah, Ryan, and you had just said that there's a lot of guys here that are saying, look, I don't want to get pushed out of the lineup. Like, you're going to have to, a lot of guys are playing for their jobs. My question really is, when you follow this team around and you're with them, what is this team's kind of goal this year? What are they trying to find out? Are there guys that they hope are here for the long term, or are they just warm bodies holding spots for who they hope takes them?
Well, I think that depends on who you're asking that question to. If you're asking Pete Mackanin what his goal is, that he wants this team to flirt with a 500 record and to compete, and obviously to contend. I mean, we can all say that when it's probably not going to happen. But yeah, they want to be competitive on a day in and day out basis, and if they can have a 500 record and go from there, that's even better. Realistically, we know that that's probably not going to happen. But yeah, if you ask the guys on the team, again, they want to carve out permanent spots for themselves on the roster, which means that they all have to kind of take that next step, whether it's Cameron Rupp and Freddie Galvis improving their offense, or Cesar Hernandez being more consistent. I mean, he's probably been their best player, so I don't mean to pick on him. But yeah, I mean, all of these guys, most of these guys, I should say, are at the infant stages of their big league careers. Tommy Joseph's another one, where, they have to prove that they're major leaguers. Otherwise, if a guy like, say, Tommy Joseph doesn't hit for 3 months, there's a guy at AAA that's going to be knocking on the door to take his job. So, yeah, I mean, the identity of this team is just it's a rebuild. They are what they are. They're in the middle of the rebuild, and there are players that there are a few guys on this roster that you could point to and say this guy's definitely going to be here in 2 years, and that's good and bad. It's good because they have options and they will spend money when they have to supplement the young core. But it's bad because there's also some uncertainty there. So it's just kind of where they are.
Yeah, and one thing that I'm intrigued by, you mentioned Hernandez, and you wonder, he's been on fire. Guys like that, they kind of fit the mold of, hey, I don't want to get pushed out of here, right? I mean, because the Phillies are probably evaluating and probably have a tough decision. The guys like that make them have really tough decisions to make when maybe they didn't have them in their plans, and he's almost forcing them into having them in their plans if he has a season like this.
Or it becomes a very good trade chip. I mean, you really have to evaluate all your options at all times. I mean, if you have a proven guy in the big leagues that, is a 300 hitter with a, say, 360, 370 on-base percentage, can steal you 20 to 30 bases a year and play superb defense in the infield, that's good to have, and it's good to build around. But do you think maybe I'll sell high on this because I'm not sure it's going to be like this for the next 5 years? And I do have a lot. I mean, really, second base, it's amazing that they didn't have a whole lot at second base 2 years ago. Now they have 3 of their top maybe 15 prospects that are second basemen. This kid, Daniel Brito, is way down low. He's at Lakewood, not far from you, I guess. He's a teammate of Mickey Moniak's. This kid flat out hit. He's only 19. But so he's further down the rung. But then you have Scott Kingery and Jesmuel Valentin, who I mentioned a couple minutes ago. Both those guys are pretty close to the big leagues. So, if you have that kind of depth, maybe you do consider the trade. Again, you have to evaluate what guys value, what's someone willing to give you for them. And, kind of with Ken Giles, he wasn't a guy that you would point at and say, you should trade this guy. He's a young guy that looks like a piece of your core moving forward. But if he's worth more to somebody else and you can turn around and get something you like better back, more depth back, then you consider it. So that's just kind of where this team is. They're not going to contend this year. Probably not going to contend next year. So you always have to be willing to see what you have on your roster and at AAA and what you can do with it and how you can improve yourself in your chances of contending, say, in 2-3 years. You have to look down a couple years down the road.
Yeah, Ryan Lawrence, PhillyVoice.com, is with us, covers the Phillies. He's in New York with the Phillies and the Mets tonight. Last year, Ryan, Tommy Joseph, correct me if I'm wrong, was not really it wasn't on the 40-man. He wasn't invited to spring training. He basically hit himself onto the team. Like, they had to bring him up. Is there a guy that is potentially this year's Tommy Joseph playing in the minors right now?
Well, and they've only played like 10 games down there, 11, 12 games, not even 2 weeks yet. So, I wouldn't want to go there. But I would say that you kind of have to, again, look at the Major League roster and look at the AAA roster and then do the math. I mean, one area where they're not getting a whole lot of production is a catcher. And we all know that one of their best prospects is a catcher, Jorge Alfaro. So if you do the math, then a month from now, Jorge Alfaro is still crushing the ball, and he has been for 2 weeks. But again, that's only 2 weeks. I don't want to state that. But yeah, so if a month from now, if he's hitting and Cameron Rupp's not hitting, then maybe that's a question that the front office and the coaching staff have to have. So he's an obvious guy because he's one of their top prospects. And you could say the same about J.P. Crawford and Freddie Galvis. But I'd say at least Freddie brings you Gold Glove caliber defense, so at least he's doing something every night that's helping your team. And JP, I think that they're going to kind of handle him with kid gloves a little bit because they want him, kind of like Tommy Joseph, to earn that promotion. And, he got off to a little bit of a slow start. But, it comes June, mid-June, if JP Crawford's ripping the cover off the ball and Freddie Galvis is hitting around 200, then you have to consider it. And the same for the outfield spots. I mean, with Kendrick and Saunders, we know that these guys are stopgap guys. They're only going to be here for this year, most likely. So if Roman Quinn or Nick Williams, really any of these guys, they can make a case for themselves just like Tommy Joseph did. And it's good you brought him up as an example because that's what they want to see from these guys. If Rhys Hoskins is ripping the cover off the ball come June and Tommy Joseph's not, that's another one. So
well, that was kind of the direction, Ryan, that I was going is, do the Phillies want these guys that I guess the fans are almost perceiving that, we want to hold them back. We don't want to rush them. Do the Phillies feel like, hey, if they're hitting, we're going to play them?
Yeah, I think that they for sure do. And I think that that's kind of it's funny how there are certain things that fans kind of grab onto and repeat over and over, even if it's not true. And one of those misnomers is that the Phillies don't call up their prospects until they're 24, 25. No, the reality is the Phillies haven't had young prospects of that caliber, period. I mean, really, between Cole Hamels and Dominic Brown, that's a long gap, like where they really didn't have a whole lot of high-caliber, high-ceiling prospects to call up. And, they have called up. I mean, Aaron Nola, I think, was 22 when he made his debut. Dubal Herrera, I think, was 22 or 23. Galvis and Hernandez were young when they got into the big leagues. So they will bring up guys. It's not like they're an organization that waits on guys. They just haven't had guys to call up. That's the reality of it. And that's why one of the main reasons, they went from being one of the best teams in baseball to being one of the worst teams in baseball is that their farm system just wasn't producing talent.
Totally bottomed out.
So yeah, for sure. And some of it was through trades, but even a lot of those trades, not many of those guys have come back to bite them. I mean, maybe like a Carlos Carrasco or something like that. But yeah, they made a lot of trades and not many of those names. But yeah, so the farm system was just not very good. So if they have young players, which they do now, no, they won't hesitate. If those guys are hitting and performing, those guys will come up. I mean, they'll be happy to do that.
That's refreshing to hear, though, for the fans out there to hear, like, they're not holding these guys back. If they're warranted, they'll be here. One thing I want to ask you, Ryan, because you've been on the beat.
Franco's another one. I mean, Franco's a good example of that. I think he was only 22 or 23 when he came up, and he hit. And then what happened? Cody Ashley lost his job. So any of these guys can do the same thing.
And now, of course, Franco's struggling now. So more on him in a bit. But how long you've been on the beat for, what, 6, 7, 8 years?
This is my 10th year.
10th year. Wow. How about that? Time flies, man.
Yes, sir.
How are things 10 years later under Matt Klintak, Andy McPhail? Is it noticeably a different front office, a different baseball team, a different organization?
I mean, I think they're different personalities than the previous regime. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, they're doing the same job. I mean, maybe you're looking at it different than maybe people were 10 years ago, but that's really baseball in general. I mean, a lot of people are looking at the game differently than they did 10 years ago. And we weren't talking about StatCast 10 years ago. We didn't even know what that was. So, yeah, I mean, there's just so much more data now available for everybody, from fans to media to front office, that they're using that. But they're also still using, old school scouting, too. I mean, the Phillies have been very kind of careful to not be pigeonholed into, okay, we're this kind of organization. They want to use all the information they have at their disposal, and have good scouts that have found some of these guys they've drafted in recent years, but they also have a front office that also has an analytical bend to it too. So, yeah, it's different because they're just different personalities, and there's maybe a little bit different of a mindset in there among those guys. But on the whole, they're still trying to produce a regular, I guess, a team that can win regularly night in and night out. So the job isn't that entirely different than it was for the previous regime.
How do you perceive the job that Matt Klentak is doing? I find it very interesting that the previous GM was constantly under scrutiny, fair or not fair. I mean, the listeners and whoever can be the judge of that. It almost seems that Matt Klentak couldn't get picked out of a lineup.
Yeah, but I would probably the first thing that jumps to my mind is it's a time and place. I mean, when Ruben Amaro Jr. took over the team, they had just won the World Series, so it was basically World Series or bust. Like, you have a roster capable of winning a World Series, you better get us back there. And then guess what? The next year, you better get us back there again. And the first thing that came to mind when you asked that question was look how Ryan Sandberg versus like Pete Mackanin are evaluated. I mean, Ryan Sandberg took over when this team was, probably at rock bottom or right about there, but he was criticized, a lot because people just hadn't yet accepted that this team was where they were. People still wanted this team to compete and didn't realize that, no, this is a team that needs to rebuild and needs to, build around some young players. Where, Pete Mackanin, how do we evaluate him? Well, they're not expected to win. So we're not judging Pete anywhere nearly as harshly as the microscope was for Sandberg. So I think it's similar where you're right, Klentak. And Klentak's also not, and again, this goes back to the personality thing. He's not, I mean, Ruben Amaro Jr. was a very visible guy, like through the media, when I did radio interviews, TV interviews. He was very, I don't want to say accessible because Klentak is accessible. If I'm a reporter and I want to talk to him, I can get him. But he's just not a guy that maybe puts himself out in front of cameras and radio interviews quite as much. And there's nothing wrong with that. But anyway, yeah. So how would I evaluate Matt Klentak? I mean, it's really hard to say because the rebuild is a slow rebuild. They're being very patient with it. I think they're doing the right thing. I don't think going and spending, say, $50 million on free agent X and $75 million on free agent Y this offseason, I don't really think that was going to help this team because they're still a couple years away. So I think they're doing the right thing in kind of waiting for these young guys at AAA and the guys in the roster to see how they progress this year. And if enough of those guys progress where they think they have a young core to kind of maybe put a contending team on the field next year, then maybe this winter they'll add a couple more marquee free agents. I mean, I think that you don't want to rush things because all of a sudden then you would have a 4 and 5 year contract that you can't get out of. They've been in that position not that long ago with guys like that. So when you're signing these 1 year free agents instead, there's less risk, and it's easier to get out of, and it doesn't put you in a bad position 2 years from now when you're trying to win.
Yeah, it seems, Ryan, that the theme of this season is like one big organizational evaluation. Like, everyone, you're getting this year to prove who you are so that we can figure out what to do in our offseason for next year. And I know that sounds like, well, that's what every year, but it sounds like almost from top to bottom is, look, this is your year to show us what your ceiling is.
Yeah, for sure. And, that's everybody's under the radar, whether it's the coaching staff and the manager obviously the manager is only under contract for this year. And then on down to the players. I mean, from AA on up to the entire roster here at Citi Field, these guys it's up to them to prove that they belong or that they deserve a promotion or that they are impact guys that you can count on for the next 5 years. I mean, we've been hearing about a lot of these names for a while now, whether it's J.P. Crawford or Jorge Alfaro or Nick Williams or even the guys that are up here already. But, talk is cheap, I guess you could say. And, eventually people have to perform. And so, all those guys, I don't want to single any certain guys out, but, I've named enough names that you probably figured it out. Come June or July, you kind of are what you are. You don't judge any player for 2 or 3 weeks of a season, especially at the beginning of the season. But come June or July, the numbers are what they are, and you are what you are. And, the Phillies have to hope that they have some decent young pieces to build around, and that's kind of what this year is about, finding out who these young pieces that you can build around are. Because come 2019, I think this team believes they should contend. And, for their sake, hopefully 4 or 5 of these guys are part of that. So, but yeah, it's a fact-finding mission. That's what the 2017 season is.
It almost takes you back to a time, Ryan, where the Phillies were pretty good. They were like, kind of on the way up, and they had like Lou Marson and Carrasco and Jason Donald, and we heard those names like ad nauseum, and it was almost
for Cliff Lee.
They were all in the Cliff Lee deal, but we heard those names, Carrasco. We heard those names for like 2 or 3 years. Like they got these guys, they got these guys.
Drayback.
We never saw them, and we never saw them, and only Carrasco's really ever made it, right? Of that whole group of that little.
Yeah, I mean, and even the what was the trade that really got harshly criticized? The Pence trade. How many of those guys have come back to bite them? Not. I don't think any of them. I mean, Jonathan Singleton has been a bust. And the pitcher Cozart, he's a major league pitcher, I guess.
Times,
and the one guy that has kind of come back a little bit to get them. Well, not to get them. I mean, it was still a good trade at the time because they added Roy Oswalt for a pennant drive, and Roy Oswalt was really good that year during that pennant drive. Was Jonathan Villar, the shortstop.
Right.
He had a pretty good year last year, but it wasn't even with Houston. It's with Milwaukee. And so he had to move on to another organization before it clicked. So, I mean, that's really a great lesson in prospects. And the Phillies have all of these prospects, but you just have to remember that that's just what they are. They're prospects.
Yep.
None of them are proven, and we don't know what they're going to become. So you collect enough of them that you hope 4 and 5 of them hit. If you have 20 prospects, you hope that 4 or 5 of them hit. That's probably pretty good odds. It's tough to hear that, but that's kind of the reality.
That's the reality. Good conversation, Ryan Lawrence, on the state of the Phillies franchise. We know the expectations seem low, but this organization, slow and steady, hopefully wins the race. Check out PhillyVoice.com for more from Ryan Lawrence as the Phillies take on the Mets tonight. Thanks, pal.
Yeah, Mike, have a good one.